My guest this hour is an accomplished music critic and author whose work has appeared in Rolling Stone magazine, Billboard, the Los Angeles Times, Melody Maker, the San Francisco Chronicle, and many, many more fine publications. And he's written well over a dozen books about music. His latest is called Hollywood Eden: Electric Guitars, Fast Cars, and the Myth of the California Paradise, which tells the story of a group of young artists and musicians who came together at the dawn of the 1960s to create the lasting myth of the California dream. Joel Selvin, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
Your book is separated into three sections: dawn, daylight, and dusk. And what I'd like to do is ask you to pick a song that you feel is a key song of each section as we go forward in this conversation.
Sure.
Okay, so let's start right at the very beginning, the dawn section. You know, at my high school, I think we had one gal who went on to be a famous local newscaster, but that's about it. And yet, University High in Southern California seems to have churned out giants in the arts and entertainment world, and all at the same time.
You know, somebody showed me a yearbook from University High in the 58 class, and I was just like, really? All those people went to high school together? And I started looking at it and realized that they were all tangled up together, and that the very beginnings of rock and roll in Los Angeles were right there, the seeds of everything. And yeah, University High is not like my high school either. It's in the edge of Santa Monica, and it serves the very well-off communities of Brentwood and Bel Air, next to Beverly Hills in Los Angeles. And in 1958, that was a very small town, very much an entertainment business village, and their high school was, they drove themselves to high school, and they were 10 minutes from the beach. You want to go play volleyball after school?
Yeah, and to put a bow on it, Kathy Koner, the original Gidget, the real Gidget, attended University High at the same time.
It really locates the whole thing, doesn't
Yeah.
it? That was the clincher. Yeah, James Brolin and Ryan O'Neal were in that class too. And there was another famous male surfer that came out of there. It was just such a time and place to be a teenager, and yeah, Jan and Dean, Nancy Sinatra, Gidget, Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys, and a handful of others all went to high school together and all knew each other in high school.
So what song do you think best captured the zeitgeist that was in the air at the time?
The pivotal song out of that section of the book was the Hollywood Argyle's Alley-Oop.
Why is that?
That was the song that really established Los Angeles or Hollywood as a place where rock and roll hits could be made.
As we get into the second section of the book, you make the point that Jan Berry of Jan and Dean was a pivotal figure in the Los Angeles music scene.
Jan's first hit record, Jenny Lee, with Jan and Arnie, was on the charts while he was a senior in high school. And none of this was out of any kind of professional blueprint. It was a real innocent drive to create this music, to follow this mission, to seek out this bliss. And every record was a new adventure and a new exploit, and moved the needle down the road, or whatever you want, whatever mixed metaphor you care for there. And it wasn't some kind of venal, calculated thing. It was this authentic cultural, social movement that lived and breathed inside these American teenagers. Surf City, which was the first #1 record out of that crowd, was really a Brian Wilson record with Jan and Dean as the lead vocalists, although Jan was the producer. And in those sessions was where he showed Brian how to stack harmony vocals and overdub them. They had 4 people singing the basic parts. That was Jan, Brian, and a couple of guys that Jan knew from University High that had a group called the Gents. Those 4 vocalists did their vocals each 3 times. So there's like a stack of 12 vocals on that Surf City. And when that record opens with that vocal line, 2 girls for every boy, it takes off right out of the blocks. And that's sort of the beginning of West Coast pop sound right there. Before long, that kind of approach to recording vocals and arranging songs would be commonplace throughout. But that was the work of Jan Berry, who by the time at that time had made like 15, 20 records, and Brian had made like 2 or 3.
Right.
So he was a veteran at that time, and Brian was just a novice. He was also the one that told Brian he should hire session musicians to play on his records.
So what would be the key song for you from this second section of the book, Daylight? Well,
of course, there's a ton of records in there, but for the purposes of Hollywood Eden, it would be Dead Man's Curve.
Yeah.
So ironic and prescient and full of everything that Jan and Dean were about. In fact, that the whole West Coast pop scene was about.
Ad Council.
WFDU FM.
That's us. We're back talking with music critic Joel Selvin, and his new book, Hollywood Eden, is out now. And we were talking about Jan Berry before the break, and this leads me into discussing this next person that factors into your book, Jill Gibson, who was Jan Berry's girlfriend for a period of time, but obviously she was much more than that. In fact, she was a mama in the Mamas and the Papas for about a minute.
She's all over that second album.
Yeah.
There's no way you can pick out her vocals from Michelle in there. Yeah, she was a mama for about 2 months. You know, Jill Gibson was so important to me in the development of that book that I wasn't really sure I could move forward on it until she agreed to cooperate. It was a complete boys' club, and the way it's been portrayed in other accounts just leaves it that way, and that's not an accurate picture of what it was like in those times. And so I really wanted to bring Jill out of the background and put her in the foreground so that people could understand what the role of women in that culture was and how they could play a part that was beyond being somebody's girlfriend, which, you know, was pretty much what was the proscribed role for women at that point in that scene. And Jill was not the sort of person to be constrained by those kind of expectations about her. She was a real free spirit and a powerful personality, and I was real pleased to bring her out of the background. And also, that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that Nancy Sinatra was
right.
featured majorly in the account, because although her trials and tribulations had a lot to do with having this celebrity father, she still had to suffer from the limited roles that were accorded females in the pop scene at that point, especially given that she tried a movie career, and she was really given just almost insulting parts in that. And her breakthrough with producer Lee Hazelwood, the Boots song, represented just so much of the empowerment of women in pop, and really, again, was a product of that time and place that seems so important to bring out, given the achievements of the males that would be.
Since we're in the dusk section of the book, what would be the key song here?
The book ends in October of 1966 with the release of Good Vibrations.
And why is that?
Because there was a natural climax to the narrative I was following, and the end of innocence had been achieved. It was for my heroes, for my their journey went from almost complete innocence to self-knowledge, and that pathway is often treacherous.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. You mentioned that loss of innocence. I hear that in the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album, too, which was right before Good Vibrations, or around the same time. And even though that was a record that not a lot of people picked up on in 1966. It's since become a landmark album of the era.
Well, of course, Pet Sounds was not successful when it was first released.
Right.
It was the first Beach Boys album that did not earn a gold record award. And it had been such a change in direction and such an advancement of studio recording that it had been subject to some considerable debate within the group. I mean, a lot of the people in the band were quite dubious about what Brian was doing. And the fact that it didn't blow up and become this huge hit just lent fuel to that argument. And Brian had to seal himself off even more from the outside pressures of the group, which are family members, and the record companies, in order to concentrate his energies on creating this masterpiece, Good Vibrations. It's a very dramatic story of how someone has to persevere through so much adversity to pursue his own vision as a creative person.
Once again, we're talking to music critic and author Joel Selvin. His book, Hollywood Eden, Electric Guitars, Fast Cars, and the Myth of the California Paradise, is out now. And, as the music scene changed and the culture changed going into the Summer of Love, a lot of these people that we were talking about were kind of left behind.
After Good Vibrations, Brian spent the next 3 years in his bedroom, essentially completely alienated from the Beach Boys. Jan and Dean were washed up. Jan was in the car crash, and he was recovering from serious brain damage. The Mamas and Papas were about done with their run. The Byrds were, stumbling towards a country rock renaissance. And Johnny Rivers was oldies but goodies by that time. So, yeah, the great shift in pop music that took place in 66 and 67 largely left those pioneers of the Los Angeles scene in the land of obsolescence. There's no better sort of emblem of that than the Monterey Pop Festival in June of 1967, when the Association and Johnny Rivers and the Mamas and Papas all blew in as the big stars, and Jimi Hendrix and The Who and Big Brother and the Holding Company and Otis Redding all blew out as the big stars.
The book, again, is called Hollywood Eden. Joel, where would people go to
Well, there's
them?
always Amazon.com.
That's right.
If your local independent store isn't open. But and I'd also mention that there's a pretty comprehensive playlist up on Spotify for Hollywood Eden. So you can hear the musical spine of the book, and it's a click away on Amazon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for appearing on the show this week, and all the best with the book, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Ghosty.